Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing great today. My voice still isn't 100% back to normal, so I'm gonna do the video I planned to do on Friday now, so I hope you enjoy that when I put that out. And I've also had some issues with my editing software completely breaking the other day. I tried reinstalling it 3 times and even system restoring my computer, but it didn't make a difference, so I've finally found a new one that I can actually use, which is quite good, but it's just taken me a little while to get used to it. But I actually prefer it, to be honest. It's just going to take time though to understand how to use all of it. So I hope everybody's doing great and enjoys these stories. And make sure you check out my Patreon for early access and my podcast in the description below. And the social that I use is Instagram, so make sure you check that out at Insomniac Horror. Take care and enjoy it. Over the years, I've had a handful of scary stories, but by far, this is the most weird. I grew up in the South, with tons and tons of beautiful places to see that haven't been taken over by concrete yet. It's nice, but along with that, it's boring. Being a teenager, I wanted to go out and have fun, led to mostly improvising with your buddies and hoping something good will come out of the night. There wasn't really a local spot to go hang out at like a club or cool bar, and the places that were close to this were boring because you did them so many times. I'm sure if you lived in a rural area, you can understand that feeling completely. Something that I found is a ton of employment in as a teen was just cruising around super late listening to music. I would fill up my gas tank, grab something to drink, and I would just drive around until the sun came up. It's just a way for me to clear my head and relax. The country roads were always fun to drive around at 2 AM. Well, one night, I absolutely get more than I bargained for. I can't remember what month it is exactly, but I know for a fact that it's summertime because I'm out of school, and I also remember it being a comfortably chilled night. So, if I was to guess, it had to be around June or August. I was cruising around like I always did and was worry-free, having my music blaring in my zone. I decided to head down to a park out of boredom. This particular park is at the very end of a long stretch of desolate country road, but is a really pretty drive because of that. When I say desolate country road, I don't mean that it's some dirt road that goes through the woods or anything crazy. By this I mean that it's a normal paved road, but there is nothing on it after a certain point. The entire road takes about 20 minutes to drive down to get to the park, and after about 10 minutes into the drive, houses start to spread out further and further to become no houses, and just a road leading to a park. I think a lot more of the reasons I like driving at night is because how crazy it looks, and it's kind of an adventure. The park isn't open for camping or anything. It's mostly just a lot of land with walking trails and biking trails set up through miles of woods. So obviously at around 3 in the morning it's pretty dead. I made it there and just did a slow normal little loop around drive of the park. The night before it stormed so badly I remembered my parents had to take shelter because of a possible tornado. There ended up being no tornadoes, but the storms are rough. Because of this, I came up to a fallen tree in the road that looped around to the exit on the other side of the park that must have been where the storm was. It wasn't some massive tree or anything, but I know for a fact that there's no way I would have gotten over it in my car, obviously. It's pitch black everywhere, besides the front of my car because of my headlights, and because of that, I immediately ruled out backing up the entire way. I just drove when I entered that way. I knew it was super dangerous and there was no way. At this point on the road, there was flat land on either side of me. I figured that it would make the most sense just to back up in the grass beside me a little and then drive back the way I came. It was a one-way loop around the park, but I wasn't really worried about going out the wrong way since it's so late. So I started to back off the road so I could just turn my car around. All was good until I went to pull up back on the road. I totally didn't take into account how wet the grass was and the amount of mud. My car goes nowhere. My back tires are completely stuck and they're spinning in place. I was trying to floor the gas pedal. I start to become pretty scared at this point. Not the most ideal of situations to be in. I immediately take out my cell phone out of my pocket, but I've got no service. I have a massive sigh of relief now, but it's sarcastic. I hit my phone and suddenly I have a bar. I call my parents and tell them what happened and where I am. They're annoyed that they're gonna have to pay for a tow truck. Both my parents drive small four-door sedans, and there'd be zero help in this situation. It's about 45 minutes away from my home, and most of human civilization. So I realize that I'm gonna be stuck out there for at least an hour before someone can get me. It's a weird feeling, but I try getting out of my head and continue listening to music. I mean, there's not much more I can do. After I kind of calmed down from the initial anger I had, I start checking out my surroundings. I didn't even notice at first because of what's going on, but in front of my car's placement is a field full of mostly deer from what I can tell. But there's tons of them. There must have been 50 eating grass. The field isn't directly in front of my car, but if I was to get out and throw a rock in that direction, I could have hit one. Now, this didn't really help out the creepiness that's going on. Look out in front of your car and see ATI reflections is weird, but it's just a field of deer. I watched them for a little bit, but I'm quickly over it and just start to browse through my social media apps. They seem to have been quicker than they usually load. After browsing my phone for about 15 minutes, I finally get a call back from my parents letting me know that a tow truck's on the way, but it's about an hour and a half from me. Still to this day, I remember hearing and having the thought, you gotta be kidding me. I understood that me and only me was the reason that I'm in this situation, so I can't really be mad at anyone else. But that was very obvious and not what I want to hear. I decide that the smartest thing for me to do is to make sure my doors are locked and lay down and sleep for a bit. So that's what I did. Okay, here we go. So I wake up 45 minutes later to the feeling of being watched. I'm not sure if anyone's ever experienced this before, and I don't know how common it is, but it's as though a sixth sense has went off in your head telling you you must wake up. Waking up to that feeling's not a nice thing. I sit up, immediately checking my surroundings. I see nothing. I look through my car very quickly for any sort of weapon, finding a pocket knife. A pocket knife. I'm very scared now, even though I saw and heard absolutely nothing. The feeling alone is truly harrowing. I was shocked to see that The field of deer in front of me is still full. I don't know anything about the animal, but I guess I always assumed that they don't hang out in the same place for long. Not sure why I thought it, but I was surprised nonetheless. I called my parents back to see if they've heard any updates from the tow truck dude. I decided to not mention the feeling I'm having because I didn't want them to worry more, and I also knew that there's literally nothing they could do to help if I really needed it. So no update from the tow truck guy. Ah, great. The call lasted just a few minutes and I felt like an idiot. They both had to wake up for work in a few hours and now have to spend over $100 on top of all of that and are worried about me. I could tell they're annoyed at the situation but worried. I told them I'll be sure to tell the guy that I'm fine and make sure he hurries and that I'm sorry when he arrives. We hung up and I looked from the phone and immediately went from 0 to 100 in panic mode. The deer in front of me are all completely perked up, staring in the same direction in front of them. Let me remind you that there's around 40 deer in this field. Every single one stopped dead, standing still, staring. I put on my high beams and stared, waiting for anything to happen. Nothing. I tapped my horn real quick. They don't even budge. They are completely still, glued to what's by them. The way the tree line was, I couldn't see that far over. I knew that they're looking into the woods by them, but where? I can't see. I could hear my heartbeat now. I grabbed that stupid pocket knife, just waiting for something to happen. I would say it was about a minute after I honked. Every single one of them in unison starts to run the opposite way, at full speed. I mean, within literally 20 seconds, the field's empty. I'm petrified in fear. I knew staying in my car is the safest thing to do, but it's the worst feeling being a sitting duck. My head's on a swivel. I was freaking out in every possible way. I assumed that it's a bear or something, but it could have been absolutely anything. I was convinced at that point it was the devil himself. I don't know what to do. I knew the tow truck was close by, but I have no idea where he is. I begin to shake because of nerves and look around to make sure nothing's by me and focusing on the field in front of me. I did this for what felt like an actual eternity, sitting in complete silence and complete darkness in the middle of nowhere, waiting for someone to jump out and attack you. 15 minutes go by and I start to see lights break through the tree line. As I get closer, I see the tow truck guy. The lights on his truck felt like Jesus coming from the heavens to rescue me. He gets up to me and I jump out of my car, immediately asking if he has a gun. I told him very quickly what's happened, and something's definitely out nearby. He let me know that he had a shotgun in the truck and assures me that it's a bear or bobcat. He gave me the whole, they're more scared of you than you are of them crap. The tree was small enough for him to sort of bulldoze it out of the way with his truck, and then he attached my car to his, pulling me out of the spot I'm stuck in. He was very nonchalant about what I experienced, but I'm badly shaken up. The whole time he was doing this, I still have my eye glued to the field, just waiting for something to happen. Anything. He was completely done with everything in about 15 minutes, and he told me to follow him out to his truck to the main road again. I get in my car and was ready more than anything to get out of here. We start to drive away from the spot I was in, my head on a swivel, completely shook up. As we're driving away, I look in my rearview mirror. We were down the park road just a tiny bit, but I could still see the spot I was stuck in, partially lit up from the vehicle's lights and the moon. I watch in my rearview mirror, and a man comes out of the tree line where my car was, walking into the middle of the road, watching us drive away. My heart stopped beating, legitimately. I lost my breath. My eyes start to fill with tears because how absolutely terrified I am in this moment. I couldn't see any kind of details of what he looks like, or even necessarily what he's wearing. To be honest, I don't care. The feeling that I felt driving away from that spot, knowing that he was right there the whole time watching me. Watching me as I'm freaking out looking around. Watching me as I'm completely alone for a long time. Maybe even coming up to my window, watching me asleep. That's a feeling that is something I can't necessarily put into words. All those years later, it still messes with me. The entire time we're driving off, as long as I can see him, he doesn't move. He watched us in the road. A million things are going through my mind. I was scared there may have been multiple people watching us. I tried to figure out if I should start beating on the horn like crazy or not. I decide that all I want to do is get out of there, more than anything. The second we finally got out of the park and was able to be on a 2-lane road again, I fly past a truck driver doing nothing but 70 the whole way home, flying through stop signs, driving like crazy. I don't care. The only thing on my mind's home. I get inside, running there, very quickly acknowledging my parents and saying sorry and thank you. I went to my room, don't get a second of sleep. I was researching for any records of these things happening here. Escaped convicts, similar stories, etc. I came to the conclusion that the man was a squatter or something. I've read many things online about how people camp out in the woods building shelters. But what's the most scary part for me is what's unknown. What if? There's so many possibilities. I never told my parents this story until years later after it happened, and I'm already an adult. It freaked them out. I never went back to that park or area again, ever. Even though I no longer live there, I will never go back there. And God forbid that this person's caught anyone else out there. Even typing this, I'm having chills up my spine. I hate that this happened so much. I hate the fact that I was asleep there, so vulnerable and completely unaware of the danger around me at the time. Me and my mum have a shared house kind of in the middle of nowhere. Really in the middle of nowhere. We're surrounded by miles and miles of forests. Now, my mum has some medical issues, and sometimes when she's really tired she can hallucinate and see things that aren't really there. So when she saw someone looking in her window at night, she didn't think anything of it. I become a little paranoid and decided to sleep with her one night, and it turns out it wasn't just her medication or problems causing it. There really was someone there. I screamed and it woke up my dad. He quickly grabs a knife and runs outside to try and find whoever it was. but there's no signs of anyone. And 20 years later, we still have no idea who was watching us sleep or for how long they were doing so. So just over 10 years ago, I was fresh out of college and moved back to my parents' house for the free rent/food for 9 months or so before I was leaving the state for graduate school. Now my parents are super chill and gave me my own space in the house, but being a 22-year-old single guy and living at home with my parents is certainly not ideal, but I didn't have any other options, so I started looking for some work to pass the time and save up money. Anyway, so summer turned to winter and I haven't found anything solid, but by then I desperately needed to spend some more time out of my parents' house, so I started looking for some part-time gigs to do and find some light bookkeeping for a small business owner guy that my dad knew. I didn't really want to do it since it didn't pay well and it was short term and wasn't even a real office setup, but then again, since my parents live in the middle of nowhere in the Midwest, I knew I had limited opportunities to make money, and this guy was going to pay me well too. About that time, a friend of mine in the city said that if I just paid him $200 a month and tied it up, he'd basically let me crash in the living room until I moved out of state. That's all I need to hear. I took the job. So my dad's friend had a construction type business that helped out with building stuff a little, but was ultimately more focused on renting out a few bobcats and large augers they owned. Also other various drills, then odds like generators and stuff. Now, this was a small mum and pop type thing where everyone knew each other, and the office only opened on days that someone's coming by. And this was just generally a mutually beneficial situation for the business owners and locals. Since I had minored in a business adjacent area and my dad recommended me, they trusted me to go in there for about 20 hours a week, check and file rental forms and make sure no one missed a payment date. The old building where I worked was about 90 years old, sitting on top of a hill, and the downstairs used to be an old country bar until the 70s, when this family bought it cheap, cleared out the bar and fenced in the property to use its parking lot area to store all their rental equipment and gear. I could generally come and go as I pleased, work any hours I wanted, as long as I got the work done. So if things were slow and there weren't any rentals for a couple of days, I'd usually go in after 7 and stay around midnight or 1, since I knew I'd be alone and could listen to music and do what I wanted. The office I worked in was on the second floor of the building above the old bar and looked out onto the long driveway. From my seat, I can easily see out of the window, and once or twice saw a family of deer or raccoons scamper by, and I always glanced out when I saw movement since it's noticeable. So up here, it's incredibly remote, very still and quiet, so if something unusual occurred, or something felt off, I would definitely notice. Now one night during winter, it snowed a few inches, and my dad told me to stay in case it causes the roads to be bad, but I had an old SUV, and more than that I just really wanted to get out of the house, so I went to work at about 8 PM and was going to stay until after 1. I always left the gate open at the bottom of the hill since, believe me, when I say no one ever showed up because we're in the middle of nowhere, I really mean it. I think the nearest occupied house was about 2 miles down the road, and to even turn onto our short road, you had to only be coming to our Pacific building. It was a locals only type thing too, so I'm jamming away to Fallout Boy. Now everyone makes mistakes when they're young, and having coffee watching the snow outside, when I see an orange reflection there. I'm confused, but it looks interesting. At one point, around midnight, I went downstairs to the big bathroom to do my bathroom business, then coming back upstairs and getting settled into my work. I probably did about 5 minutes of work when I glance outside and see a huge imprint of something in the snow, just below the light. It seemed like a massive dog or substantial animals rolled around there. Since I didn't notice it 15 minutes before, it had to have happened while I was in the bathroom, or maybe back when I was focused on work, since I would have seen that movement for sure. I just shake it off and assume maybe a dog or farm animals came here. It's around 2 in the morning, it's time to leave. And as always, I got out of my car, unlocked the gate, and to be honest, I'd pretty much forgotten about the imprint. But when I looked down, I'm shocked to see that it wasn't just somehow disturbed snow. It was undeniably the imprint of a human-made snow angel. If you don't know what a snow angel is, it's when you lay on your back and move your arms and legs, and it appears to be an angel. I used to do this as a kid, so I 100% knew for sure what it was, and it was deliberately made underneath the light post. But it wasn't from a kid, it's from a very large person, or at the very least, a normal-sized adult wearing tons of layers of big winter clothing. I look up and saw what I already knew, that whoever had made this snow angel could easily look up and have seen me through the window. So they must have been staring at me to do this. Why else would they have done this here? Now I definitely would have seen or heard someone if they drove up to the building. Someone walked deep into the middle of nowhere in the freezing cold to do this for miles. Literally stopping in front of our building, then doing a snow angel. Weird. I glance around in the tracks. I can see some that lead to the woods. It's clear the person didn't use a road, but instead came from the opposite side, which made me instantly uneasy, since the side was just trees and darkness for miles and miles. I was definitely freaked out, because for once someone's come here, but they've come out of the middle of the woods to do so. I look around but don't see anything amiss at all, and now just want to get the hell out of there. When I get back to my car, I drove a few feet, and I realised that my boss won't be there for 4 hours, and is probably going to see the snow angel and assume I did it. I wouldn't have been that worried, but I was young and felt it's going to be something that's looked down upon for me, so I opened up the back gate and ran it over. Also, as a side note, I should mention that when this happened, the snow starts falling more heavily and I know I won't be able to see much more. I'm stood here absolutely terrified, and that's when I hear it. When I'm getting in my SUV, there's the loudest high-pitched sound laughing that I've ever heard coming from the woods. It sounded like the fake laugh that the witch in the Wizard of Oz made. Like something was doing it in a fake manner on purpose to show that they're not scared of me, or were trying to see how I was going to react to this. My god, I'm scared now. And they're doing this on our property. I knew it was close enough that they could see me, but I can't see them. After a few seconds of laughing, they stopped, and then it's just silence everywhere, except for my heart beating through my ears. Then, the laughing starts, louder this time, more like screaming. I panic. Now, I spent a lot of time in that area, and I know what coyotes or foxes sound like, and that's not them. This is a person trying to emulate a woman laughing. Like someone deliberately making a fake screech, trying to scare me. Well, it worked. After that 5 seconds, I immediately filled with adrenaline, get in my car, and drove like hell away from there as fast as I can without sliding off the road. Back at home, I was up all night trying to figure out what happened and tell my parents. Now I know it's definitely not anyone I know in the area that would do this because they don't live close by, and they would definitely tell me after if they'd done it. And why would they be out there that late just to prank me in the freezing cold without their car nearby? I didn't do any drugs. I didn't drink, and I have no mental issues or have a history of it in my family. I worked there for another 6 weeks and never had another issue. Though I knew where my boss kept his gun, and I always made sure it was there when I started work. Thinking of that experience, it just terrifies me that they'd been there for hours staring at me, and were waiting for God knows how long to laugh at me. I mean, I don't know how they didn't get hypothermia. It all just terrifies me. Well, where do I start? So let me give some background information first. I grew up in a very rural area. My parents have a pretty big piece of land with a nice 2-story farmhouse in the middle of it. To the south of the house is a peach orchard. The west is where the driveway is. It goes through an alley of cottonwood and peach trees, but the land is pretty open and was used for cattle farming. The east and north is dense woodland and shrubs, which reaches out to our neighbours about 4 miles away. Back then, I was working in a carpenter's shop. I just got my driver's license, and so I'm able to get there on my own. It's about a 1.5 hour drive though. We started fairly late in the day at about 10 AM. Now, the owner of the company was sort of a night owl and loved to sleep in. Because of that, we had to stay until 9 PM. That was no problem in the summer, but turned out to be a bit of an annoyance in the winter, as it got pretty dark early and I hated driving in the dark because the lights on my car weren't the best anymore. I drove a 1987 Chevy pickup, which had seen better days. I didn't have much money on me back then, so this was all I can afford. So one day in late December at about 10 or 11 years back, I left work much later than usual. I had made a pretty stupid mistake on a nightstand I was building for a customer and needed to fix it, as the customer was going to pick it up the next day. When I finally finished, it's around midnight. I cast out on my stupidity, closed the shop up tight and went to my car. There are 2 routes I can take to get home. One is on a highway, the other is through backcountry and dirt roads surrounded by thick brush and trees. I usually took the highway as it was much faster and safer, especially in dark. But this day, the highway's blocked by police because of an accident, so I took the long way home. As soon as I left the main road and made my way up dirt trails, I got this feeling, you know the one, as though something bad's about to happen, almost like an impending doom. The longer I drove on the road, the stronger the feeling I got, until it was like all of my body and soul was aching desperately to turn around, drive back all the way to the roadblock and wait until it got opened again. I tried to suppress it as best I could and tried to convince myself that I have driven this route many of times before and I know it's safe. I'm driving on an especially tough piece of brush, and all of a sudden, my left tire popped. I did my best to keep the truck on the road and make it to a safe stop. I kept a spare tire in the toolbox and had changed tires quite a lot on my own, so I knew it'd just be a minor inconvenience and I'd be rolling again in a matter of minutes. That's where I was wrong. I climb up on the truck's bed only to find that my toolbox has been broken into and all my tools and spares have been stolen. So there I was, miles away from the nearest settlement in bear and wolf country, in the middle of the night with no cell phone or way to repair the truck. I always kept a sort of survival kit in my toolbox with a blanket, axe, fire starter, and some MREs. But it had gotten stolen too. Thank God I still had my trusty knife my sister gave me when she moved to Finland. So I made the second, but bigger mistake of the day, deciding to walk home. To this day, I still don't know why I made this decision. All I had to do was wait in my truck until sunrise, as I knew a neighbour was driving this route every day at around 8 AM. He could have taken me to town and called my parents to get the truck, but I said nah, I'm walking home. So when I went, I locked the car, took my rucksack with my belongings with me and started walking. I couldn't have had walked for far when I got this eerie feeling like somebody's watching me. I turn around but nothing's there. I pick up the pace to make it out of there. All of a sudden, I heard some rustling in the brushes to my left. I call out if anyone's in there, but of course, I get no answer. The feeling of being watched becomes stronger and stronger, the rustling more frequent, when suddenly the brush stopped and I come into a small clearing. That's when he spoke to me for the first time. "Hey there, boy," with a weird pronunciation. The first part was spoken soft, almost gently, but the boy was like an explosion to me. He made a tiny pause in between, then spewing out boy. He's big, I guess about 6'6", wearing a long trench coat, hat, grey short hair, lifeless eyes like a dead fish. That's what really scared me. But then I see his dog. It's a massive black shepherd-like dog, looking almost like a wolf. I've never seen anything like it. I froze immediately out of fear. I hear this term, but could never imagine it being like this. I can't move. I just can't. I tried, trust me, God did I try. "What you doing there, boy?" he said to me. "Don't you want to talk to me, boy?" I still can't move a finger, but my mouth slowly starts working again. I told him about my truck, how I'm going to try and walk home, but I don't think he was able to understand a word I'm saying, as I'm stuttering and slurring the words because of fear. He made a step towards me, his dog fixated on me like prey. He came so close I can smell this weird smell. Now there's something else I can't quite point out. I still stood there, unable to move. He took a deep breath, closes his eyes, almost like he wanted to remember the smell of fear radiating from me. He started to grin. Not a genuine, honest grin, but one of those whose eyes weren't involved, like he was somewhere else. Then, stayed lifeless as they were. "Be careful out there, boy. There are a lot of dangerous things out there, boy. and he vanishes into the brush, just as sudden as he's appeared. I started to throw up. My body moves again. All of a sudden, my knees feel weak, like I can't bear the weight of my own body. I collapse to the ground. My whole body starts to shake uncontrollably, and I sob with relief. As soon as I regain control over my body once again, I run. I ran like I've never ran before. I ran all the way home, which is quite a long way. I can't describe the feeling of relief coming over me when I saw the old familiar porch lights coming on and I reached the edge. Hey there, boy, I hear again. My heart skipped a beat. I scream in sheer terror, and I knew that this is going to be the end of my life. I freeze again, so I didn't stop running. God. I ran and ran and ran, and never even bothered to look back. Only when I reached the warm yellow circles of light cast by our front porch did I dare to look back. And there he stood, on the edge of the woods like he did on the clearing, with his wolf on a leash. He grins at me creepily again. I fumble out my keys as my parents locked the back door at 8 p.m. Unlocked the back door and stumbled in. Only when I've locked the door do I feel safe again. I went upstairs to my room and made sure that all of the windows were locked and the doors. When I look out of the window, he's gone. I told my dad about this when we got to the truck the next day, and he knew nothing about it. I've never been in graver danger than that. The sheer size of him was scary enough. I'm just thankful that I got out in one piece. My dad owns a small cabin up in the Midwest. Now, it was snowing heavily at the time of this incident. I was staying there on my own. I liked how secluded it was, so I could really free my mind there. One night while I'm staying there, the snow's falling heavily. I just love looking outside the window, relaxing. I have the small fire going. I'm listening to music on my phone and really enjoying myself when I hear some kind of high-pitched sound. I can't figure out quite what it is. I wonder if it's something the fire's done. Taking out my earphones, I check, and that's fine. My attention goes back towards my bed area, and that's when I see some condensation from my face clearly on the window. I go to rub it off and my heart drops. I see a handprint and go to rub that. It won't disappear. These have been made on the outside of the window. I have no option but to investigate. I'm worried that my dad or brothers come to see me and can't get in. I grab my rifle and head out. I can see footprints leading up to the window. I call out Dad and Jerry, my brother. I get no reply. I decide to follow them. Why on earth would they be up here without telling me, I think to myself. I follow the tracks a little further when suddenly they stop. And the ones I'm following are clear as day. That's when I hear the high-pitched sound again, and I bolt it immediately to my car. I don't even bother getting my belongings. Something's terribly wrong here. I drive all the way home during the night time and only tell my dad the following morning. Him and my brother are both at home, nowhere near the cabin. Now what's worse is they've also reported hearing some weird sounds and seeing strange lights at night. To this day I have no idea what it was, but it terrifies me so much. I'm somebody who's very lucky to live next to nature. I live with the nice rocks and trees, so I think I'm very fortunate to have this. Now, I wouldn't describe myself as an adventurer really, just somebody who likes to go out and do things that are more brave, I guess, is a better way to put it. Now, most of my life I'd like to go through forest walks on my own. Sometimes I do it with a friend, but not that often. I don't know why, I just almost felt like the experience would be tainted. Now, I realised one day that I wish the case was different, and after that I did actually start going out with my brother a lot more. Let me explain. So, I love the summer walks more than anything, and on one particular summer, I was enjoying my time as usual. I'd been to a store to go and get a soda, and I was just slowly drinking this. At the time I just bought some cheap grey running shoes, and I would usually wear these for my walks. That's because, of course, the rocks are going to mess up all of your shoes, so what's the point of wearing really nice ones that you know are going to get smashed up? I also have my trusty headphones with me. Now this was a few years ago when you could actually plug in your headphones, and I had these massive ones I got on discount, but they're actually really good. So I'm doing my usual, listening to music that doesn't match the environment at all, but enjoying my walk. Now, for the first part of my walk, I don't actually see anyone. I walk past an old bunker that's been there for a long time and wonder if anyone's actually in there or not. Apparently people used to go into these things, but they had to concrete around it to stop them. I don't know what went on in them, but I always found them interesting. I walked over the thing and I hear a strange clicking sound. I realise it's probably what I'm standing on, so I quickly move down and try and get out of the way. I continue on my walk like normal, actually going further than my normal route. I ended up taking a call off of my friend, and we were just talking for what felt like hours, what was only 40 minutes. However, it was enough time for me to get a little bit lost. I wasn't too worried though. I could see up ahead there was some kind of railroad track, one that surprisingly I hadn't seen before, and it had been abandoned long ago. I decided to continue up here and see what it's all about. I also think that A, I can probably figure out my way back from here, and B, it must lead to civilization at least. As I'm walking, I realise the sticks look a bit different off the side of the gravel road. I then realised that there's quite a lot of animal bones around here. It's strange because this isn't something that I really noticed before, and there really seems to be a lot of them. I was actually a little bit worried, but more curious than anything. Now I would have had to have said that these have been here for a long time, and they're bone dry by now. They all seem to lead up to the rail tunnel. Now, I'm met with a dilemma. I can explore the dark tunnel on my own with my phone torch, which has about 40% left, or I can just turn back the opposite way. I'm pretty sure I know how to get back now, and I choose the first option, which I realised later was probably stupid because I was on my own, but honestly, to me, I'm just happy because I'm going on an adventure. Now, as I'm walking, it becomes apparent there's lots and lots of sticks along the road. I don't really pay much attention to it, and I continue walking. Now, as I'm walking, something suddenly snaps under my feet, and I decide to look down to figure out what this is. It then dawns on me. This thing below my feet is another bone. There are lots of bones up here. In fact, there's too many, to be honest, to be comfortable with. I think this is a little bit strange, and click. I can hear the clicking sound once more. I realise something's off now, but I just think I'm too strong to take on anything stupidly in my head. I'm convinced if it's a small animal I can just kick it away, which is funny now in hindsight. So I continue on, now realising that The bones are increasing the closer I get to the mouth of this tunnel. No sign of trains either. I think this was a disused one from maybe 70 or 80 years ago, but I'm not thinking much of it. Now I eventually make it to the front of where the train tracks are leading. Now I can see absolutely nothing, but I stupidly decide to press on. Now I thought I'd have a better chance of using my night eyes, at least if anything happens, so I decide not to use my phone flashlight. I realise now that they must have blocked off the other side of the tunnel, or more likely it's collapsed. I walk into the darkness for about 20 seconds and there's no more clicking sounds to make me paranoid. I think this is a little bit bizarre because I'd almost grown used to a strange clicking sound every so often, and I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, or maybe I had some problem with my ears. Now, before I actually got very unwell with an ear infection and I didn't want to experience it again, so I was actually quite annoyed at the time. I decide to turn on my flashlight quickly because I can hear water dripping ahead of me. I then realise that part of this is actually flooded. Just as I stand there, I can see some dark, shadowy figure moving to my side. Almost instinctively I turn on my flashlight and realise it's my reflection. I laugh and I hear my laugh echo for what seems impossibly long. It felt like I was standing in front of infinity mirrors in a lake. It's hard to describe, but it was a strange feeling. I realise that it's a rusted out pipe that's actually done this. And it looks like there's almost a mine to the side of me, but this is underwater now, so I don't bother going there. I then hear crunch, crunch, crunch to my right. I turn my flashlight over to that direction and I can see a mouse running across some more bones. It turns out there's a lot of these things. Now I'm a little bit worried. It dawns on me that I'm probably standing just in the home of some hungry mountain lions. Or maybe not. Maybe the real monsters here are people I don't know. Or maybe there was some kind of disaster that happened that I don't know about and was covered up. I just realised that it's time for me to leave. Especially too, who knows, what if I take a step forward and I cut my foot open on the water? Then I'm in big trouble. And my parents would kill me when I come back if they heard what I'd done. I was also a little bit frustrated now because I stepped in a big puddle and ruined my trainers. Another strange thing is I realised how bad it smells in here. I look down at my phone and I've got 32% battery now. I'm actually quite annoyed, not because I don't have enough battery for the flashlight, but it's going to be really boring if I have to go back on my own and I haven't even got music at least. Now, I get to the very opening of this tunnel and just stop for a minute to look around. That's when I notice it. That distinctive clicking sound that I can hear again. I can't figure out exactly what it is, and I'm met with some kind of movement in front of me. I realise now that I need to get to some kind of high ground, just in case I have to try and climb up a tree or just anything in case it's an animal. I'm pretty convinced it's a mountain lion that's decided it wants to hunt me and take me into the tunnel. I don't actually have any way to defend myself, and I realise that I'm probably going to have to run for my life and it might be futile. I quickly climb up to the top and realise that it's not a mountain lion. I realise that standing just off the distance to me there's someone staring at me. I can just about make out what they are, but they're hidden behind a tree to be definite. Okay, this is pretty weird because I'm pretty sure the clicking sound's now coming from the direction of that figure. Now, it dawns on me, whatever this thing is has probably been watching me go into the cave and has actually waited for me to come out again. So, as you can imagine, there's lots going on in my head right now, but common sense prevails and says I need to get out of here. But I remembered what I'd seen on the news before about how that it's important if you think you're being stalked by someone to just not act like a victim, just confidently walk on your way. Plus, I don't know where I'm going. I quickly look down the hill and wonder whether I should try and come out to the other side and continue following the train tracks. Click. No time to think, I hear the clicking sound again. I realise I'm going to have to go all the way around this thing and try and make it back to civilization. I decide to pick up a quick jogger's walk pace, if that makes sense. Just under the pace of jogging, but walking very quickly. I quickly put on my headphones, but not to play music. For once, common sense had prevailed. I do this so I can pretend I'm listening to music, but secretly spy on this person. I decide to look at my phone for the time, then decide to turn around and continue onwards. Now, it's still pretty bright and sunny out, but nightfall's not too far away. I continue walking to the side of where I've come from. Actually very disorientated in truth, but I have a mental map. Now, my heart keeps beating and beating, and I actually feel my arms going stiff because of the blood flowing through them. I actually can't keep track of this person, and I can't really make out who they are or what they're doing. I suddenly hear more movement just behind me. I quickly glance around, just in time to see something or someone dart behind a tree, and then click. I can see a large black circle staring at me. I don't know what this is. I've heard stories about Wendigos, and I really don't know whether my mind's absolutely exhausted from the whole trek, or if I'm actually seeing this thing. Then I realise this is a camera. This person has been taking pictures of me literally all day, and the camera's staring right at me. Click, click. I feel like I've been captured by something that should never have caught me. I don't bother being cautious anymore. I just turn around and sprint for about 2 minutes. Now this absolutely exhausts me because stupidly I don't have any water with me. My vision actually starts to go quite bad now, and I can see black patches all around my vision. This is something I get when I'm exhausted and very dehydrated, and sometimes I can actually pass out from it. There's no time for me to pass out because I know I'm going to end up in that cave again. I keep on walking, and eventually I put some distance behind myself and this person. I realise that they must have been wearing camouflage because it's so difficult to see them, and it's not dark enough that I shouldn't be able to. Now the camera seems to be quite a good one too, which is something that I've realised now. It's almost like this person is professional at whatever they're doing. They seem to know the area far better than I did too. The sky has now gone quite a nice colour as the sun is setting, and I'm actually feeling quite cold. All I have on is shorts and a sports t-shirt. I go for my phone, but it's completely dead now. I stupidly take off my headphones, which reveals that of course I'm fully aware of what's happening around me. I eventually have no sign of this person following me with the camera. I continue down a hill, and finally I can see where civilization should be. I make as much an effort as possible to act confident, but it must have looked stupid. It must have looked like a drunk person trying to imitate a confident walk because I'm shaking a little bit. I can't tell whether it's from the fear or fatigue, but I notice that something's off with me. I eventually make it down back to where civilization is, and I have a quick look around me, and I can't see anything. There's literally no signs of this figure or person. I have realised too that I've also lost my card, so I can't actually get on the bus and I have to walk all the way home. I'm just very glad to be back with civilization now. When I make it home, I decide not to tell anyone about my experience because I know they'll be worried. When I turn my phone on again, I had lots of missed calls. Not because people are worried about me, just because I was supposed to call my friend again, but of course I ran out of battery. I ended up completing the call and I just forget about it for a while. Now this is until a few days later. My mum says, "How did you not see what happened on the news today? You always go out to that place." I say, "What are you talking about?" And my mum tells me a person was kidnapped not far off where I always like to go walking, and how my mum's never gonna let me go out there again. I look into my horror. There's a report of somebody going completely missing that they're convinced has been kidnapped. They investigated the entire area but can't find anything, and I believe the investigation is still ongoing to this day. Now, I might be drawing too many things together, but I'm convinced that that person out there with the high-powered camera was actually stalking me and looking for an appropriate victim. I'm not sure whether it is because of my height or just because I was quick enough, but I'm pretty sure if I had stopped for too long in the inside of the tunnel opening, I'm certain that I would have been like some of them bones around. Now, I know that this isn't probably related and the bones were probably just there before, but my god, it's such a horrible, weird feeling for me. Ever since then, I constantly look around myself when I'm walking normally. It's something I didn't notice until I was with some of my friends and they said, "Hey, you always look like you're being chased." And I haven't told any of them the reason why I'm so scared sometimes for no reason. Now, I want to tell this story just as a warning to other people. It's cool to go off on little adventure type things on your own, but please don't be as stupid and as oblivious as I was. Not only did I not realise how much danger I was in, but I didn't even have water with me. I could have even passed out from dehydration, or easily cut myself in the cave and got really hurt, and nobody would be there to rescue me. So please take my story as some kind of wisdom for yourself. Be careful out there, because you never know what might happen. I live in a Nordic country, so my winters are pretty harsh. I was still an avid hiker though, and I loved to go out into the woods and actually enjoyed camping a lot. Now there's one specific area where the authorities overseeing it would always keep an eye on you in case anything went wrong, and it did for me one day. Now this is in October time, and there's quite a lot of snow everywhere. Now for the day in question, I was actually having a really good time. I was enjoying my hot chocolate and my dehydrated food. I was actually out here camping on my own, and it was almost a challenge for myself to see how well I could do. The snow had been relatively light throughout the day, so I wasn't too worried about it. I did hear a strange howling sound during my venture, but I didn't think much of this. I thought even if there are dangerous animals, with the stuff I have they should probably stay away. I was well prepared for any situation basically. Now my goal was to get to the top of a mountain ridge kind of thing. It's hard to describe, but the scenes from there would be absolutely beautiful. Now, I started to get very cold around midday. I wasn't close to any of the ranger stations or anything, so I wouldn't be able to stop now. I only had about 5 more days to do this, so I wanted to feel like I'd been successful. Now it was also very quiet, almost beautifully. I love it when it's snowing but it's still dead silent where you are. I think there's truly nothing like it for me. I grew up in this kind of environment too, so I was very at peace while I was there and never really worried about anything, to be honest. Now, it starts to become very cold towards the night time and the snow picks up very quickly. Now I'm actually annoyed that I can't even keep my hot chocolate warm that I've made. I had good supplies of fuel and food at this point, so again I wasn't too worried. Now one of the most important things is that you make sure you position your tent away from the direct incoming wind in terms of the door, because there's nothing worse than opening it and you get a huge wind gust and suddenly you're fighting off hypothermic temperatures, struggling to keep your tent warm. I realised quickly that I've set up my tent the wrong way, and I have to spend about another 35 minutes trying to reposition it on my own. As I'm doing this, I hear the howl of some kind of dog again. I think, oh great, I'm gonna have to fend off these guys on my own and put my tent up. I decide not to worry about it too much and realise that the hypothermic temperatures are my biggest danger now. I actually can't feel my hands and I worry maybe I'm going to have to put out an emergency call to get help. But eventually my experience kicks in and I manage to put the tent up pretty nicely. Now I'm actually having quite a good time once I get the tent up. I'm enjoying some of my dehydrated food again, which I've rehydrated with some of the snow around me. And I'm just writing in my journal like I always do. I'm actually reading a book about some of the great Arctic explorers from back in the day, and I actually really enjoy doing so. It's something that I've done previously before and I always found some peace in it for some reason. I always wanted to go to the great North or South Pole one day, but I'd have to be careful. It might be cold where I am, but I know in the South Pole it can get to -80 in the winter, which I think is absolutely insane. I eventually decide it's time for bed and eventually drift off to sleep. Now I'm woken up and disorientated. I can see someone pushing their hands into the side of the tent. I've wiped my eyes and realised that in fact it's a big lump of snow that's formed. I'm not scared because I was quite tired, but I think it's really odd. I quickly punch this off the side of the tent and quickly fall asleep again. Now when I'm awoken again, I feel some kind of weight on my legs and most of my body. I think, maybe I'm just cold, and I try and move my legs but I realise I can't. I then open my eyes and I realise I'm completely stuck. It then dawns on me. Something's completely off here. I don't know what's happened in the time that I fell asleep to now. I think maybe there was some person out here who actually pushed a tent in on me and made it collapse. I suddenly snap into true consciousness and realise, God, the snow has made my tent collapse on me. I have virtually no way to move and no way to reach for help. My adrenaline fills my body as I realise that I'm now in a true life or death situation. I don't know how much snow is on me, but I know it's rising fast and that I'll quickly die if I can't resolve this. I try to move for a good 3 minutes and literally can't do anything. I then stay still. I lay my head back a couple of inches so I can move it, and realise this might be it. I'm laying there and not really knowing what to do when I realise I have to fight this to get out back to safety again. I move my legs to no luck. I move my left arm and realise I can just about wiggle it around enough to start slowly making a clearing. It's hard to describe, but the tent has collapsed onto me, and the snow on the top half of my body is less than the snow on the bottom half. The biggest issue now again is just how cold it is. I scream out, but I don't get any reply. I continue moving my left arm until eventually it becomes clear. I move my left shoulder and eventually I can move my other arm too. I'm now working frantically against the clock as I realise that the snow's forming just as quick as I can clear it off. I eventually wiggle my legs around and become free in this sense too. I manage to eventually push myself free from the snow, but I realise there's no way I can get out of the tent because the door's actually under me. I do have a knife on me, but of course if I try and cut the tent open I won't have a way to stay warm. I don't have enough supplies on me to be able to afford to do something like that. I eventually flip the tent over and can just about open the tent door. I realise this thing's completely collapsed on me and I don't actually know where my supplies are now. I put my head out for a second and get a massive wind gust that knocks me back into the tent. I realise, great, Now I'm gonna have to dig around in the snow to try and find my emergency communication equipment. I stupidly left it just outside of the tent, and I'm convinced that the cold's gonna stop it from working. I have to move the entire tent with myself just to stay warm. And I think, God, I can't find anything. This is crazy. Why did I ever let this happen? I quickly get some of my hot water and throw it onto the ground to melt the snow, but I don't see anything. I now realise I've got two options to survive, and I can either stay put and hope I find my communication equipment, or try and make my way back down the way I've come. I decide that if I stay there, I'm probably going to be dead, and the tent's going to collapse again. I end up dragging the tent behind me with whatever equipment there is, and move slightly. It's almost impossible for me to stand, and I'm constantly being pushed back during this time. I've never experienced anything like it, even in all my time out there. I know I can make my way down from here, but it's going to be tricky. I look where I've come from, but I literally can't see more than a foot in front of me. It's like a whiteout. I have no way of getting to my communication equipment, so I just have to step down and slowly get off this thing, with my equipment in my tent being dragged behind me. I do this for a good 20 minutes before I have to stop because it's just so cold. I realise then that I've barely made it anywhere. I realise there's a large tree near me, and I quickly start digging. I'm frantically tunneling. Now I'm doing this so quick that I actually start sweating, which is very dangerous. There's not much time to worry about that now, as I quickly burrow under the tree. I eventually make a big enough clearing that I can actually put all my stuff here, then cover up the end of it with my equipment and my tent. I do so and grab my sleeping bag and blanket around me and light a candle underneath me. This is actually an emergency way to stay warm, which of course you have to be careful of the fumes and the fire risk, but I think it saved my life. I do this for a little while, but I'm hesitant to make a bigger fire because it might trap all of my oxygen and mean I suffocate under here because where I am in my tunnel. I know it's bad because I can't hear any of the animals outside. They've of course all took shelter and decided to get away from this, but not me. I'm stuck under here, not knowing what to do. Not really knowing what to do now, I frantically look for everything and try desperately to find any of my comms things. Unfortunately, I can't find anything, and I just lay my head back, not sure what to do. I just pray the storm can subside soon. I light another candle, having two going at the same time now, and I actually feel quite warm. I decide I have to drink and eat to try and keep my energy up. I just wait here and start reading, hoping the storm will pass. My head fell backwards and I fell asleep for a second before snapping into it again. Sleep is something that I can't afford to do now. Now after a good 2 hours of waiting, and through a few more candles, I quickly look outside, and thankfully, I can see a lot further ahead of myself now. I don't have to worry so much about going out, and I think I can wait here and run out of candles, or I can find the comms equipment. I can see where my original campsite was and where I'd struggled down, just because of my experience. Most of it's buried under the snow, but I decide to go for it. I quickly cover up where I've come from so it stays warm, and I very quickly crawl my way up to there. Now, it wasn't as bad as before, but it's still bad enough that I can't even stand up, and of course I'm at risk of sliding down this thing. I dig and dig away until eventually I find my comms equipment. I'm so happy that I scream out, but I suddenly snap into it and realise I have to get back under my tree and try and make an emergency call. Now at first when I tried using my equipment, it doesn't work and the battery's dead, but I knew another technique I could do where if I constantly rub the battery on my coat, it could charge it up. I do this for a good minute. I put the battery in, and I hear a sound. Click click. My comms equipment has come to life again, just about. I immediately make out an emergency distress call and there's help coming and it shouldn't be too long. They say I should just go back to the tree and wait until they hear from me again, and that's exactly what I do. I quickly go back under my tree and spend the whole rest of the time trying to charge up my battery again. I decide I have to go out because there's no way they could see me because I'll be perfectly camouflaged. By now though, the storm has much passed and it's not too bad. I walk in small circles to stay warm for another 10 or 15 minutes until finally I can see some red coats appearing on the horizon. I scream out to them and they shout back. I fall to my knees and collapse with exhaustion. They come and rescued me and I managed to get away with only minor frostbite. I'm so thankful to God to be alive, and honestly if I didn't have the experience that I did out there, I would never have made it back alive. I'm still someone who likes to go out camping, but never alone like I used to. I realise now how stupid it was, but I can't really blame myself too much. I done everything right, but that just goes to show you that you can never truly master the wilderness. The wilderness will always master you. You just have to work with it. And if the wilderness decides that it wants to give you a bad hand, then by God it's going to do so, and you have to pray that you can make it out of there alive. I'm just thankful for the services who managed to rescue me. They risked their life to save me and others, and I'll be forever grateful to them. Now, I'm not a ranger, but I used to live in the outskirts of a national park in a cabin. It was a 4-mile drive from the main road just to get to the property and had no plumbing or power. This property was right next to where the park started. To call it the middle of nowhere is truly an understatement. My roommate at the time was interning with the park service, but he's a city kid. Every evening, at the dead of night, I had been hearing noises in the woods. Now it actually sounds like how somebody would walk in the jungle, how they have to stop every so often. Is it a pig, a cat, or just the wind? Now the cabin didn't have a lock-in door, and the owners didn't want me to install one, so I began sleeping in my car. The property's huge, and I'd parked my car over an acre away from the cabin when I heard something. I heard the footsteps again. I moved out. My roommate stayed sleeping without locking the door. Now it turned out he got robbed not once but twice after I moved out, so I firmly put in motion cameras, and there was a man walking with a long rifle who would set up in the bush to watch us. I'm a 44-year-old male. This took place when I was 18. I still can't drive down back roads. So I was driving in the deep south down a lovely stretch of road heading to Hattiesburg to see my family. I'm from Canada and only knew this way of getting there. So I'm currently in the middle of nowhere, Mississippi at 1 AM while driving. I can hear the sound of someone yelling. I know I shouldn't have, but I pulled over. I thought maybe someone needs help. I had a big mag light in my trunk too. I should point out that this car was my first car and it wasn't very good. I called out into the darkness saying, "Hello? Is someone in trouble?" I get no response, just an eerie silence. I heard something in the distance. It sounded like somebody trying to sneak around without detection. I heard a slight, somewhat distant snap of a twig, followed by the sound of a voice. "What are you all doing in my part of the woods? No one goes here." I nearly have a heart attack. I started to sweat from fear. Please don't hurt me. I just thought someone wanted help. Come here, son. I can't have anyone seeing what I'm doing. I then run around to the front of my car and hop in the driver's seat, mag light still in hand. I turned the key only for the car to sputter and die. Oh, come on, not now. I turned the key again, hearing the car choke to life. I put it in drive and floor it. The car was leaving a trail of pollution like the car out of Uncle Buck. I looked in the mirror to see my worst nightmare. My heart skipped a beat, and I see headlights coming up quick. My car can only go 80 flat out. I came up on a bend, giving my crappy handling car the fright of its life, and I have to slow down. I braked and feel a bump from behind. The vehicle effectively tailgated me. I can't make out the driver due to the headlights and height of the truck. We round the bend, and I put the pedal down all the way. I can hear the car's engine struggling to make up the revs now. Slowly the car crept up to 80. Now, it's literally just inches from my bumper, but I knew we're coming up to an intersection, so I decided to try and make the truck go. We got to the intersection and I fake a turn. It worked initially, but as I slowed down and sped up from the fake turn, the truck swerved violently and started following very close again. The car struggled up to 80 again. I looked in, and the headlights are blinding. I felt another big bump as the truck rammed me again. The car swerved slightly, but I corrected it with my adrenaline-fueled strength. I heard the truck rev up, readying for another ram. I swerved over to the opposite lane, nearly losing control, just as I saw a road coming off then. With the truck having fell so far back, I make my turn. I turned the car lights off and spun the car around, watching the road ahead. Sure enough, a big pickup truck roars past. I wait a good 30 minutes before continuing. I called the cops when I get to my family's home, but all they found was an abandoned home. Everything in the home was normal except one thing, a picture of my car. I've never been to a back road since. I saw what I think was the same truck a few weeks later in a gas station in Alabama. I brought a new car since then and only visit that part of my family every once in a while since this happened. So for some background, I live in New Hampshire in the southern suburban area. When I was younger, and currently, I lived in a couple of places because of a divorce. I'll start off with Mum's house. There were woods that were behind my mum's house that we owned. We owned a pine-dominated acre, but the whole woods were about 20 acres. You could always see civilization from it, either the suburban houses row or a street on the other side that had no houses on the sides. The woods always felt very warm to me, and I really loved to be in them. So, it was basically like a third parent to me. However, on the other side of the street was another lot of forests, full of 10 to 20-year-old oaks and birches. Now one day when I was maybe 9 or 10, I was playing in the nice woods, and now I'd really explored the whole 20 acres to be honest, and decided to check out the other woods on the other side of the street. The road was flanked on both sides by forests, and there was a nursing home down the street. I crossed the street, and the moment I entered the forest, my mind was telling me get out. I had the sensation of being watched. However, I had always been curious, so I pushed deeper until I come to a circular thinner part of the forest, not a clearing. There was a pile of trash ahead of me, not drug paraphernalia, but old food and trash clothing. Now my inner voice was screaming, get out of there, get the hell out, so I ran back through the woods as fast as I can until I reached a road. I went back into the nice woods and I felt fine. About 4 or 5 years after, I was kind of bored with the woods behind my house and wanted to check out the forest again. I go back, now with a knife in the holster to explore. I had my hand on my knife the whole time. I had the being watched and get out feelings again. Now, I never found the finned part, but found the shoes, dozens of old rotten shoes. There was also a camping stove and an old propane can, food trash and camping pot. I picked it up and took it home, since I needed a cooking pot for camping, and I still have it. The part that actually scared me though was the shoes, all kinds of them. Nice shoes, small shoes, female running shoes, baby shoes, at all varying ages and states of decay. I was freaked the hell out, but I kept pushing. I got to the 35th degree embankment, which I climbed and found a residential area above it. There was a thick fence with no gate, and the other houses had no gates at all. The trash and shoes were too deep in the forest to be thrown in by uncaring homeowners. I finally decided to leave. I was super scared by the time I got out of the forest, and now I was and still am a very emotionally stoic person. However, the worst experience that I had yet was at my dad's house. Well, this was more of this kind of neighborhood. It was a tightly packed neighborhood, and it was surrounded by a thin forest. Small forests of huge pines separating the houses. It was in a city, but every now and then I would see a moose or deer. So one day, I was walking my dog during dusk. It was almost total night and the streetlights were on. I got closer to a turn in my walking path with this pine and oak forest and thought I spotted something in the forest and freeze in fear. My gut wrenched in the most horrible, terrible feeling ever. It felt like I was just told the worst news of my life. It looked like a deer standing up. Not a Wendigo. It had a fat white belly and brown fur on its back, and it was staring at me. I originally just fixate on its belly, but then when I look up at its face, I couldn't make out much of it. I have good eyesight and should have been able to see it, but it was like my central vision was suddenly switching to peripheral. It just blended into the forest. I could see the body and not the head. Then it fell to the ground, gets on all fours, turned and ran into the direction of the fence. On the other side of the fence is a dump. The forest is only about 50 by 50 feet, and this thing must have jumped about 6 foot over the chain link fence to get out. My dog, a hound who is normally smelling the pizza or car 30 seconds before it arrived, notices nothing. I could hear it run away, and the dog perked up and looked up as soon as it ran off. So I knew I wasn't seeing things. I then immediately turned around. I used to live in the rural Philippines in a tiny fishing village. Right next to our house was a fenced off area that had been overgrown and really broken down. It looked really creepy at night, and a lot of people said it was haunted. From our rooftop, you could see a lot into it. One night I was staring at it and I saw a strange blue glow coming from inside and shadows moving across the windows. I couldn't place it at all because there's no noises, no one speaking or laughing. It really scared me. I was an avid backpacker until I moved to Cali last year for grad school. I've got a couple of spooky ones. Was up in Baker Wilderness right up on the Canadian border. Was on a 4-day backpack, 15 miles on the first day and 11 on the second, with plans to hike out the same way we came in. Mid-second day, we're pretty deep in the backcountry. Ranger's office warned us the trail wasn't regularly maintained and to expect slow going. There's lots of washouts and little bushwhacking, but we were close to the primitive site at that point. Suddenly, I noticed absolute silence. Now, I've spent a lot of time in the woods, and you start to get a sense for when things are gonna get dangerous. Whether that be because of an animal or something else. Today it's something else. We hike through some dense brush and get to a clear section of trail. Out of the woods from a steep bank to the left tumbles a guy, giving off really bad vibes. He was filthy, wearing a shirt missing all its buttons and nothing underneath. He was very malnourished and his pants were very loose. He only has a loop string for a belt. Worse, he's got a big revolver in his hand. He walks towards us, dragging an injured foot behind him, quickly pointing his gun, talking to himself. I decide to be chill. but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't scared. Weird thing is that he didn't even notice us. He was basically on top of us about a meter away, stopped and looked at me, said, "Well, have you seen this person?" To which I responded, "We haven't seen anyone today." Without another word, he limps down the trail and we never see him again. We check in at the ranger station and they said there was no way to the other side and that they weren't aware of hikers. They said they'd look into it, but we never heard what happened after, and we're not really sure what come of it. I'm not a ranger, but my story was pretty weird for me. I was camping on the west coast. I had back problems, so when I camp I sleep in my car. I had the back seat converted to a bench seat and put my sleeping bag there. I cover the car windows for privacy. Now early one morning I hear this rumbling sound. It's loud enough to wake me up. I'm a child of the suburbs, and what it really sounds like is when you push a shopping cart really hard and rough along the ground and parking lot, making lots of sound. Then the car gets bumped. Hard. It actually moves. I immediately start unzipping the sleeping bag and look inside, and quickly outside. I realize there's nothing there. I have no idea what it was to this day, and I think it might have been a bear. I'm not a ranger, but I was hiking in Andorra with a friend. Long story short, we ended up in Spain, found another trail and were following it without a map. A while ahead of us we see a man with two golden retrievers coming in the same direction. He looks young and is carrying climbing gear on his shoulder. We're rushing down the trail to catch up with him and finally do. We ask him for help with directions and he tells us exactly where we are and that we need to be going this way, and about 12 kilometers away there's a hotel. He says there's another smaller town about 6 kilometers away and that he parked his car there. He says, "Hey, I'll give you a lift for the last 6 km if you like." But he says he's in a hurry. We're over the moon, so walk and hike for a while talking. His dogs are friendly and run circles around us. We're chatting away to the guy and he is really nice, but my friend and I are tired, so we can't keep up pace for long. The trail bends away and right then the man, now a bit ahead of us, disappears behind the bend. We get there a couple of minutes later and the trail's empty. No man, no dogs, even though the trail runs straight and we can see for miles. The two of us continue on alarmed, waiting to hear or see anything, or maybe get jumped by him, but nothing. We eventually get to town and make it to safety. We're completely freaked out by the sudden disappearance and can't really make any sense of it even today. One of the weirdest things that ever happened to me in the great outdoors was with my father and myself. Now, my father actually owned a lot of land and was a forest ranger, so him and being outside went hand in hand. There was one particular summer when we were building a cabin in some area of land that we owned. We actually had a really good time and enjoyed doing so together and were definitely bonding. However, one strange thing happened. Just as we'd finished doing everything and we were really happy, we take a moment to rest and drink some coffee. While we're doing this, my dad stops and says, "Hey, do you see that?" I look to my left and what I can only describe as a very old lady appears to have just shot behind a tree. We both look at each other in disbelief, and just as we do so, every single window that we had just installed immediately shattered. Seconds later, there was a very loud popping sound, like a depressurization. Me and my dad once again looked at each other in disbelief. My dad seems to be furious and sprints towards whatever this thing is, with me in hot pursuit. My dad wasn't worried about what had happened, he was just mad that something had just broke his cabin that we just spent all day fixing and making look good. And just as we got to there, we find nothing. No signs of life or anything ever being there or different. Now my dad's filled with a complete different look, one of fear, terror in fact. He says we're going home, and a few weeks later we actually take down the cabin and build a new one much closer to the home. My dad and I never actually spoke about it properly after, and as you can imagine it still terrifies me. Now one other strange thing that would happen is something that I'm not sure whether it was people playing tricks on me or what, but it's just really creepy. Now there's a piece of land that my dad owns that's really beautiful. I mean, it's scenic to say the very least. It has a beautiful river that runs down it, and I always had a good time hanging out there. I would always go here on my own. Now one of the strangest things that ever happened to me was I was sitting here alone when I hear a rock hit a tree. Confused, I look over to where it landed, and I can see more rocks. As I head over there, I can see my initials spelled out in the rocks, and some strange carvings and symbols on the ground of eyeballs and weird triangles. Now it's hard to describe, but it looks kind of like the Illuminati symbols, but not really. More like something a cult person would draw. Now I was pretty young at the time, so I'm terrified and sprint home. Now I decide not to tell my parents about it because I want to investigate the following day. As I do so, I go back, and everything's just as it was. There was literally no signs that anything was different, other than a slight dent on the bark of the tree where the rock hit. I still have no idea what it was to this day. I'm a 17-year-old high school guy with a weak body. I live in a small town in the Philadelphians, and this town is surrounded by rice fields, with a highway going straight across it. Part of my usual weekend routine is to go jogging early in the morning. This is at some time around 5 AM. My usual jogging route is from my house, somewhere in the middle of town, to a small hill with a wonderful view of town in the morning. To reach my destination, I would have to jog on the side of the highway. From time to time, fog would appear on the highway, and once you're inside, you can only see 10 or 15 feet before it all goes white. So one Saturday, I decide to jog. I invite one of my friends, the same age as me, to join me, since he follows the same route anyway. We left home at 5 AM, proceed to the highway. As usual, a thick fog blanketed the highway. The cars that would pass by had their lights on, and there were several one-ways because of road repairs. As we enter the fog, we decide to jog along the side of the road, past a couple of roadworks, about 100 meters along each. Now all's well at this point. We're a bit exhausted, but otherwise fine. We barely encountered anyone else, and usually they're just fellow joggers. Then we come across another roadwork, and we saw this guy crouched down on the asphalt. He was wearing a dirty orange vest, and he had a similarly dirty hard hat on. We can't really see his face, but decide just to ignore it. He looks as though he's fidgeting with something in his hands, so we thought he was just holding a few tools or something. Also, there was no one there but us, me, my friend and that guy. The fog's thick as hell. My friend signalled to me to keep a distance from the guy, and I followed him. When we get closer, we can hear him humming a strange tune under his breath, which in of itself isn't that weird, but boy, we were wrong. As we get closer, he starts acting erratically. He stopped for a moment as I passed him, then starts laughing. It wasn't a regular laugh. It sounded sinister and a little dry. It was really loud, so it began to freak me out. We didn't increase our speed at this point, as we think he's messing with us. But he doesn't stop. He just kept laughing and laughing, and we knew it was beyond a prank. I can't describe his laugh more than I just didn't trust it. We didn't look back. We were speeding up now, as we were starting to see the hill. I was gasping for air, but Somehow I didn't let that stop me. I forced myself on, and my friend was doing the same. He was probably 50 meters behind us when I looked at him. He had stopped laughing, but now he was standing straight and staring at us. He called out to us in my language in an arranged tone. That's when adrenaline kicked in. I just ran and ran until we reached the hill. In hindsight, I don't know how I was able to push myself for so long. When we finally arrive at the top, we're exhausted and nearly collapse on a cement bench and stay there for over an hour. Like a breath of fresh air, my friend laughs in a comedic manner. We then walk towards home. I haven't ate yet, I was so hungry, and as we passed the road we saw the guy in. He's no longer there. The only people there are wearing construction outfits that are working on the traffic signals, but nowhere near the man. As I got home, I told my parents about it and they said it's probably a nut job looking for someone to rob, who's probably stole the outfit, and I never went jogging again in the fog after that. This happened a few years ago when I was mountain walking. We started as a large group, but after some time of everyone choosing their own pace, I ended up walking alone. I was walking downhill through a thick forest area when I slipped on an unsteppable part of the trail, falling fully. It hurt quite a lot. Before I could get up, I see a deer walking out of the trees to my left, standing in front of me. This is not natural, because deers usually avoid human contact. Something was really off about this deer. I didn't know what. Its eyes appeared lifeless, filled with uneasiness. Then it opened its mouth to show multiple rows of what appeared to be razor-sharp teeth, and let out an ear-shattering scream. It sounded like nothing I ever heard before. It shouldn't exist. I watch quite a lot of horror movies, and yet none have come close to the scream of this. It was so demonic. After that scream, it closed its jaws and walked away to the side of the woods. Now, I've never told this story to anyone else before, but I'm sure what I saw was a Wendigo. It just horrifies me knowing that I saw this thing. For a second when it happened, I thought maybe I've hit my head, but I had no head injuries whatsoever and I knew exactly how I landed. It almost put me off running in the woods entirely. When I was young, I worked as a backpacking guide in Western NC. My schedule dictated a full 8-day shift with 6 days off. During those 6 days, to myself, my other co-workers and me would play in the woods. In the summer, you can't beat a mountain swimming hole. One of our favourite activities was called Paradise Falls, alternatively called Wolf Creek Falls. This is a cliff jumping spot with a huge swimming area, a tiny slot canyon and an inner pool. Most will venture just to do the small jump, even though it's the smallest and arguably least accessible. Even though the jump is almost 9 foot at most, you must do 10 minutes rock scaling to get there. We are all adventuring in and out from inside this tiny canyon, and you can't see the main pool. Well, we got to the jump and coaxed the first person off, a fellow guide who had never been to the spot before. She jumped successfully and swam into the main pool and beach area. Then she screamed. Because she was now out of sight, myself and another guy jumped in together and swam the short distance to her, with the others in tow. Of course we figured she was injured somehow. She was treading water and just staring wide-eyed at the riverbank. When I looked to the shore, there stood a man. He's massive, easily 6'7", and appears to have no hair on him, wearing beat-up overalls. Perhaps the most disturbing is that he had folds of skin all over his body. Imagine the Michelin Man, but this is on his face, arms and chest. Everywhere with these weird layers. He's also armed with a shotgun, staring intently at us. He just stood there and watched as we grab anything important and speed out of there. He walked slowly back into the forest and we never saw him again. Around 8 to 10 years ago, I was at a lake way out in the woods on some land that my dad owned. I was alone aside from my dog, a terrier. I had only been fishing on the little pier in the southeast corner for about 10 minutes when I get an almost overwhelming feeling of being in danger, and then notice something or someone watching me from the tree line on the opposite side of the lake. I was a kid, but somehow keep composure. For some reason, I felt it important that whatever it was did not know I was aware of them. Anyway, it started moving slowly from tree to tree, near taking its eye off me, but never truly facing away from me. The lake's about 70 yards wide, so I can't really see details, but I know where they're facing. After realizing that it was following me, I pull my pole down and walk down the pier and up the bank towards the trail back of our cabin, which is about 1/4 of a mile away. Once I hit the tree line, I bolted to the cabin and waited there with one of my dad's guns until my parents got home. The only witness I had was my dog, and he saw it as well. I know because when he saw the figure, he instantly starts growling in a low tone until I make him stop. I have no idea who or what it could have been or what the intentions are, but they're most certainly not good. This took place in southeast Mississippi near the Alabama border back in the 90s. We didn't live there, but we spent most weekends up there. I know it couldn't have been a normal person, because our nearest neighbour was a very old couple who literally lived miles away. Aside from the lake area that our cabin's on, the surroundings very thick forest. The figure was extremely tall as well. I have a very good memory, especially for details. Also, shortly before I noticed it, I got a very strong feeling that I was being watched. I never felt safe there again, and I was so glad my dad sold it. This incident happened to me when I was younger, probably around 19 or 20. I used to drive around the countryside in the woods for hours on end, up to literally 6 hours, smoke cigarettes while I listened to music daydreaming. I've been through a lot, so this is a nice way for me to let off steam and digest all the badness that happened to me in the past few years. There is a route that goes into the southern part of my state and eventually takes you to Maryland, if I'm not mistaken. If you keep going all the way, it will eventually take you to Florida. It was a road I found to be very fond as it intersected with a lot of interesting places. It could take you to cities and beaches alike, all the while somehow remaining isolated and rural. On one of those day trips, I was driving through a heavily wooded area that opens up into a field lined with trees on my left. I was pretty zoned out at this point, but something on the side of the road immediately caught my attention. In fact, it even seemed that time slowed, or I could see this apparition more vividly than any other thing I've ever seen in my life. What I saw was an older, balding man dressed in a full Catholic priest garb. His mouth is open, appearing to be in grief, screaming at the sky. He was standing in front of a dead deer, a buck. From what I recall, it was around 3 points, maybe 4, Behind the deer was a 1970s Crown Vic style police car with its lights on. It had no markings on it whatsoever to signify what country it's from. And no one's in the vehicle. I don't even think it had an engine running sound. It appeared as though the vehicle had been parked there all day. The other odd thing about this vehicle is that it has no damage on the front end to show that it's responsible for hitting the deer, nor was there any blood or anything. The deer seems fine. Taking a step back, trying to think of what I saw, it had the appearance of being staged or set up somehow, as if it was a prop for a movie. Everything was just so odd. For the speed I was travelling at, the glance I cast on this spectacle was only 4 seconds, but it so abruptly singed into my mind now. I have never seen anything like it. For some reason I started crying after seeing it. Did the forces that shape time or something just merge and I saw something from back then? I don't know, I've even been on the same spot from this trip, and there's never a trace of it, not even the body of the deer or tyre tracks from the police car that could be seen. Like a breeze, it was gone. A thing so out of place it could not have been from its surroundings. I have no answers to any of these questions. Only a lack of closure for something that's scarring my brain. The following isn't my own story, it's actually my father's. So my father worked as a fire lookout worker. Basically it meant that he spent a lot of time up in the fire towers, usually by himself, and he would have to patrol every so often around where his tower was, make sure no one was doing anything wrong, and mostly just keep an eye out for any fires. Now he'd done this job for a long time. He had a career that was at least 5 years long in this. He did other things too, but he said this was his absolute favourite thing in the world to do. He loved it when he could look around and not see anyone for miles. For myself, I think I'd get a lot more bored of this, but I guess back then it was more fun, because there wasn't as much to do, I suppose. Now my dad said that sometimes he would communicate with other workers in nearby fire towers with their radios. This was his most favourite thing to do because it could get lonely up there sometimes. He had a buddy, Ryan, who he would regularly communicate with. They would often work similar shifts, and they would actually go out drinking with each other sometimes when they weren't working, of course. Now in my dad's job, some nights he would have to stay up in the tower for quite a few days on his own. Again, this is something he had no problem with. However, he did have 2 or 3 scary stories that I'd like to share with you all. Now the first was on one particular evening. My dad says that it was extremely cold. He doesn't know why, it was just almost like the atmosphere was thicker, like when there's fog everywhere, but at the time there wasn't any. He said because of this, he had a very big heavy winter coat on, but he was also having issues with connecting to the radio correctly. Apparently there was some kind of moisture in the air, which meant the electronics, which were more simple back then, weren't working very well. So anyway, there's nothing much for my dad to see, and he decides to lay in his bed for a few minutes just to rest his back. At the time he was doing some drawings and needed to rest his eyes too. He did notice something rather odd though. He could see a light off in the distance. Now of course he grabs his binoculars and has to make sure there's no fire. As he does this, he realises that he can't actually focus on whatever this is. It's a red colour like a burning ember, but there's no smoke. And it doesn't seem to be spreading. It doesn't seem to be too big too. My dad decides that he better go and investigate it, so grabs his coat and heads down. As he heads down, he realises just how cold it is. He's annoyed because he has to leave his warm tower station and he can't be bothered to walk that far. But he has to do it because of course this is a part of his job. He realizes as soon as he gets down that he can't actually see where the fire or light is coming from. Of course this is a little bit concerning for my father because there could be a much bigger fire and maybe smoke's concealing it. But then again, surely he would have seen something by now. So as he heads off in the direction where he saw the light coming from, he gets a strange feeling that he's being watched that he just can't shake. He doesn't let this deter him, however, and he continues towards where the light is supposed to be. He wonders now if maybe his mind was playing tricks on him and it was where his eyes were strained, because he's walked out to nearly exactly where the fire or torch was and he literally can't see a thing. He takes a while to look around and just smell if there's anything burning. He can't smell a thing, and he realizes that he's come a long way from the tower now. Clearly there's nothing too pressing. My dad then decides to turn back. Just as he's walking away, he can hear a strange chanting sound in the distance, almost like somebody singing but more rhythmic. My dad says that it only lasts for 1 single second, but he's pretty sure he heard it. It could always be an illusion of his imagination, but he said it sounded too real. He's a little concerned now and decides to head back. While he's doing so, he's convincing himself that this is all in his mind and there's nothing to be worried about, and he heads back to the fire station. When he gets up to the fire station, he realizes something really odd. Now, there's not only one torch exactly where my dad's just come from, but there's multiple, and they're all about exactly the same height. My dad then gets his binoculars and still can't differentiate exactly what he's seeing. He goes to radio it in to his buddy Ryan, but he can't get any signal because of the electronics playing up. He realizes this is quite a big issue now, because if there is actually a fire, he's not going to be able to let anyone know, and he'll have to quickly get into the truck and go over to the next station where Ryan is and let him know. Now my dad's growing quite concerned at this point. He decides to step outside of the actual cabin windows of the fire tower for a closer look with the binoculars. As he does so, he realizes that something's off now. He can actually see clearly because the glass isn't distorting his view of whatever this is, and he notices that whatever this is seems to be holding up a torch. He can't make out exactly what it is because it's entirely black, but my dad realizes that there's at least 5 of these things now, all moving around very slowly with the torches. That's when it hits him. He held his breath for just a second and he can hear the chanting again. Again, very rhythmic, but multiple now. My dad soon realizes that something's very wrong. What's worse is he has some of his lights on, and of course they're not going to know exactly where he is. So he quickly goes back inside and hits the light. He needs to be quiet, and he needs to not be seen for this moment. My dad lays down trying to figure out exactly what to do just outside of the cabin near the stairs. He quickly looks down and thankfully there's none of them figures coming towards him. At first he thinks maybe there was some kids playing pranks on him, but why on earth would they be out here at this time, this far away from everything, where you can only get in trouble? He then sees 2 or 3 more lights appear, and eventually he realizes that there's 10 of these figures holding up the torches, and every so often he'll hear the chanting sound. Then, just as soon as it arrives, it fades out into the distance. My dad decides to be brave and hold his ground for as long as he possibly can, but he understands that he's now in a situation that maybe he can't deal with. "Ryan! Ryan!" he screams onto the radio, but doesn't get a response. All he can hear is static. My dad doesn't have any weapons with him, and he's now concerned for his life. Just how many of these things are there out here, and what do they want? He very hesitantly takes the first step towards his truck, but he realizes that he hasn't checked down the stairs. Maybe, just maybe, he's safer up the fire tower. But then again, what if they set fire to this with the torches, whatever they are? He remains there for what feels like an eternity, but says was probably only another 5 minutes. To his horror, he realizes that these figures are actually getting closer to him and his fire tower. He has no choice now but to go down. He's fighting with every step the urge to immediately run back up and just scream and lock himself in the top, but he knows he can't do it. He takes some very slow steps down, hoping not to be heard, but soon realizes that these things are picking up pace. He bolts down all of the stairs in what must have been record time, and he just makes it towards his truck. Just as he gets in the truck, he realizes that he doesn't have his keys with him and he has to go back up. He was so scared that he literally couldn't think straight. He then starts bolting it up the stairs again, and he luckily finds the keys. He's too scared to actually look up as to how close these things have got to him, and he just runs all the way back down. The moment he steps foot onto the ground again, he can hear them much closer this time, making a whispering sound. The torches have gone out, but he can actually figure out where they are by the sounds, and from what my dad told me, it couldn't have been more than 20 meters away. He quickly gets into the truck and drives as quick as he possibly can over to Ryan. He doesn't look behind him as he's peeling away, and he can hear something getting closer to him in the tree line as he's pulling away. He was too scared to even look to the side to figure out exactly what it could be. Again, in record time, he makes it over to the other fire tower, where his friend Ryan's angry at him for not answering any of the radio calls. He then explains exactly what happened, and Ryan goes pale as a ghost. Ryan explains that he too has spotted them before, but he was too scared to tell anyone in case they didn't believe him or thought he was going crazy. They ended up calling it into the station, and they launched an investigation to find out exactly what was out there. Unfortunately, they needed my dad and Ryan to be part of that, but they both agreed it was okay if they did most of it in the truck and let the other rangers take over and figure out what was going on. After hours of investigating, nobody could find anything. Luckily, another worker took over the tower for that day, and my dad still gets chills when he talks about it. He doesn't know exactly who or what it was out there, but the thing that scares him most is whatever these things were, they move far too quick to be human. He said it could just be because of the adrenaline and panic setting in, but he's honestly never seen anything like it. Another one of my father's stories is when he was working in the towers during one summer's evening. He said he kept on hearing suspicious noises around where he was set up during the day, and he thought it was just animals. He didn't know exactly what animal it was, but something kept on climbing up the steps, chewing part of the steps away, then running off with whatever food it could on the stairs or left around. My dad said he didn't mind and actually encouraged it, thinking it was probably a cute squirrel or something, leaving peanuts and whatnot. My dad always made sure that he didn't leave them too high up in case the thing fell, but he said he realised that in previous days, the trailings were getting progressively closer to where he was sleeping, and he thought it was pretty odd because one morning last week he had woken up to see some peanuts crunched on the floor right outside of the window where he was sleeping. After that, he decided to not do it anymore. So anyway, my dad kept on hearing noises but thought it was probably nothing, and just continued on with the rest of his shift. He was periodically checking around and reading and listening to the radio. It eventually comes to the next morning, and this is a very cold day in particular. My dad says that what he saw next is one of the most scary things that he ever saw in his life. He goes to open the door, and there's frost on all of the windows. Just as he does that, he can clearly see handprints outside of the door at human height. Also, he steps out to find a note saying, "Why no peanuts?" Of course my dad reported it, and they did some investigations but couldn't really find anything. They tried to tell him that it was kids playing a prank on him or maybe just a homeless person, But why would a homeless person be out there in the woods? And what kind of people would play a prank like that on my dad, where clearly they were going to get arrested for it and could get in big trouble or really hurt? My dad also doesn't understand how they got up the station so quietly. After this experience, my dad said that he always made sure the door was locked, and that he would never ever leave food out again, for animals or anything. My dad's final story isn't his own one, but actually his friend, Ryan. Now you may recall me talking about Ryan in the first story. So basically, Ryan was stationed in another tower pretty close to my dad's, but you'd have to drive to get there in any kind of decent time. Now, on one particular summer, my dad's friend Ryan realised that there was a fire, or at least the embers from one, and he has to go and investigate quickly. He radios it in, and he quickly goes down to get into his truck to try and drive over there and see how bad it is. He eventually gets to the source of the fire and realises that it's a huge blazing inferno. He couldn't see it too well because it was over a hill line, but he's very scared that this is going to spread badly, so he quickly tries to radio it in, but he can't get any signal on the walkie-talkie. He speeds in his truck to get back to his own fire tower, but he realises there's lots of smoke ahead. He rolls up the windows so he can continue breathing half-decent air, and just as he does so, he slams the truck to a halt. Up ahead, he can see his very own tower on fire, and the trees around it burning. He quickly drives off in the opposite direction to my dad's tower, and they call it in. Turns out there's an absolutely huge inferno, and it takes days for them to put out the fire. Luckily nobody was hurt from this, and they just think it occurred naturally. But one terrifying detail for Ryan is that his fire tower had collapsed due to the blaze, and had he have not left about 20 minutes sooner, fell asleep or anything, he would have died in the fire tower. I'd worked in the fire towers for a long time, and I wasn't really scared of much, but there was one particular thing that I can never forget and still is kind of glued into my mind. So, on one particular area that we would go to, we would have lots of reports of a strange man with a backpack sprinting through the forest. We were sure he was homeless. That was until we realised from some of the other fire tower workers that this exact thing had been reported for over 50 years there. They even given him a nickname, the Cheetah, because he doesn't stop running. Now what's pretty scary about this is no one's ever seen his face or can actually confirm exactly what the hell it is. I did have a few times that I was stationed at night and I would actually hear some sounds rushing through the trees. I was convinced it was a bear, so I'd quickly go and get my mace, but every single time I went down, I would just capture the glimpse of something running off that was too small to be a bear, but big enough to be a person, and nothing more. I was convinced it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but who knows. Well, I guess I found out one particular evening. Now, I pretty much let it fall into the depths of my mind and presumed that this is just my mind playing tricks on me because hey, I can remember a time that I was stationed out here before where I'd driven up to my tower one day and I could see my tower on fire. I quickly turned around to see if there was any other signs of smoke, looked back, and it was completely fine. It turned out that my mind had started playing tricks on me because I'd been on my own for so long, and I managed to get sent home for a few days to recover. But anyway, on this one particular evening, some other guys had radioed in that they had reports of somebody running through the forest. I assumed it was a homeless person or a lost hiker and was pretty worried, so I decided to investigate from the top of my tower. I have my binoculars out and I'm looking literally everywhere for any sign of this thing or person. And what do you know? I can't find anything. Just as I'm doing this, I pushed too far and I dropped my flashlight all the way down. It immediately goes out and I'm really annoyed. That was my main one with the spare battery in. I had no choice but to go down in the dark and investigate. Annoyed, I put my binoculars to the side. I make my way down the steps and I have this strange feeling that I'm being watched. Just as I get to the very bottom of the stairs, I hear this strange screaming sound in the distance. I almost have a heart attack until I realise it must be an animal. But this sounded far too powerful, and it almost went through me. I quickly reacted by grabbing my flashlight, and realised that it's completely dead. Just as that happens, I hear a scream again. This time, fight or flight takes over and I drop the flashlight, and I sprint all the way back up to the top of the tower and lock the door. I hate to admit it, but I actually barricade myself in, quickly call into the radio that something strange is happening, and cower there for about 5 minutes. I realise I have to investigate and convince myself I'm just being stupid. I grab my binoculars, and feeling more confident now that help is on its way, I head down the stairs slowly. I can't actually see exactly where the flashlight is, and I need to make it to the bottom. Just as I do that, I'm met with that running thing. It's exactly like it's been described to me. It's like somebody sprinting through the forest at full speed with a big backpack on, who's too dark to really make out exactly what they are. I rub my eyes for a second thinking this can't be real, and just like that, it's gone. I decide I've seen far too much now, and quickly go back up the tower and decide to ask how long the guys are gonna be. Just as I get up there, I can see a light off in the distance. It's not just any light, it's a flashlight. It's going far too quickly through the trees. I look through my binoculars and I can just about see the slow fading out light of clearly a flashlight. I don't believe what's happening, and then, after sitting there in disbelief for what feels like an eternity, it was probably only 10 or so minutes when I hear my buddy's truck pull up with support. As I get down, I realise that that's my flashlight gone. I just start connecting the dots and say what's happened, and one of the much older workers there says, "Hey, did that running guy steal your flashlight? Yeah, we kind of figured out when you called it in, don't worry about it. We don't know what this is too, but you'll be fine. Don't worry, one of us is going to stay here with you for tonight." I try to explain what's happened, but they all seem to be aware of it like they've encountered it before. I was convinced it was my mind playing tricks on me, but now, I don't really know what to think. I was too scared to even rest for the rest of the shift up in the tower, and they put me with a new guy who was also just as confused as I was. While we're up there, we can see the slow glow of the car driving off, and we both feel pretty scared now. Fortunately, nothing else happened, but to this day, I still have no idea what that thing was. I don't really believe in the paranormal, and I'd like to say it was my mind playing tricks on me, but why does so many of the other workers there know about this? Why has this been going on for so many years? I can never solve this, and I kind of don't want to because it scares me too much. When I first returned from the war, I was a power line rigger. This was on EHV lines, which are extra high voltage, the kind on top of the steel towers. Those are transitional lines, not sub-transitional like most inner city lines. So anyway, I had a job during a heavy windstorm in 2008 to go out and repair some lines near Colorado and the New Mexico border. It was great pay, since it was an emergency call out, so I agree. I met up with my crewman and head down from the Colorado Springs area. We get there at around 9 PM and start getting to work. Windstorms are notorious for failing lines, but not EHV or UHV lines, since they are rigged differently. When I crane up to see the broken link on the tower and inspect the damage, I remembered seeing over the tops of most trees. I observed the view for a moment and saw some nearby lights from a campfire. As soon as I saw the light, I hear yelling coming from that area. Now it must have been about 300 yards away, as I hear a woman yelling. She kept saying, "Someone please help," over and over again. I crane down and start yelling for the guys. They heard it too, and were asking questions. This is really odd. We never see anyone out there. I told them about the campfire lights coming from the direction our trucks were facing. We jump in one of the smaller trucks, since it's a 4x4, and head down the road. We look everywhere for the light, but don't see a thing. We drove back and forth, and then back again and slowed down. We rolled down the windows and stopped the truck in the area where the light should be. We all heard moaning sounds coming from the right of our trucks, so to the north. It sounded like two people are having heart attacks, and I mean really loud. So now we're on edge. The site supervisor was calling the police now. Given the general area we're at, they told us to check to see if we feel safe. Because I have the war veteran attitude, I decided to look. Two guys came down with me, and our supervisor stayed with the truck to wait for police. Apparently, they had a station not too far, like 15 minutes or so away. I armed myself with a pickaxe, and the other guys had conduit pipes like 1 inches. We all started walking through the trees with our headlamps on, because it got really dark now. The moaning's still coming from ahead of us. We got through the trees into a small clearing. It looks empty. The moaning stopped. We checked around and hear nothing. We went back to the truck, and as soon as we got there, we heard the woman yelling again, yelling the same thing. "Someone please help." It was just to the north of where we were. One of the guys yelled back saying, "Where are you?" and gets no reply. Then we hear her scream in pain, and nothing else. We're already running back north and called the police, but they've showed up. They must have seen us running north because 2 of them came after us. We stopped in the field area, and they stopped with us and asked what was going on. We told them. They helped us look around and saw nothing. We walked back to the truck and didn't hear anything else. They said they would hang out for us and check if anything else happened, so we get working again. The police are now parked next to each other, talking while we worked. When I craned up, I can't see any campfire lights or anything. We did the job. Took about an hour and a half until we're done. When we were packing our tools to head out, one of the cops left, and the other comes with us. He told us that just to the west, there was a small plane that crashed, and people burned to death. He said the police and paramedics got to the scene, and the fire's still going. He told us about how 2 bodies were found away from the plane, crawling away from it, and one of the bodies is still there somewhere buried from the 70s or 80s. Yeah, we packed up fast and got the hell out of there. Now I never saw a fire, just light on the trees. Now I can't tell you how creepy that stuff is to find out afterwards, and the voices and moans were so clear. I always kind of believed in the afterlife after this, but God, did it mess my head up. I'm so glad other people were there to experience it though. The cop believed us too, but didn't hear anything about reports of a fire or anything else in the area afterwards. Back when I was a Boy Scout, I took a weekend-long training course called National Youth Leadership Training. One of the last parts of the course was an overnight hike into the woods, with no guide, to find our designated campsite and see how we would work under stress. We finally got to our campsite and began to unpack. We each bought a tent, but half of us left ours behind to lighten the load and buddied up. Lo and behold, my buddy brought a one-man tent only. Either I slept outside or things are going to be really cramped and I didn't want that. The sky was clear and I slept under the stars. The next morning, 4 of the other guys claimed that they saw a coyote walk up to me, sniff my face, stare at me, and leave. They were too scared to go and make it leave. They stuck to their guns though, but I didn't believe them. 4 years later, I was working at the camp as a staff member, and I'm speaking to a senior there, and apparently he said coyotes are pretty common there, and they often boldly show up. It made me realise what the guys were saying wasn't a lie. I just can't believe they let me sleep with a coyote literally at my face. God knows what would have happened if I'd woken up. I went camping with some friends near Lochmond in Scotland. We set up camp about 3 miles into the woods near a small river and got the fire going to cook some food we brought with us. The site is very remote, but in the evening a couple of guys hiked through and stopped to chat with us. They're from Poland and seem friendly enough, but ask a lot of questions about our group, how many we were, etc. And I'm a bit suspicious, but I put it down to being from different cultures. It's around 10 PM. I start to feel very ill, and I'm thinking, is it possibly from food poisoning? Now, I'm very confused about this because I'm sure the food was cooked correctly. My friends are all pretty drunk, and I had drunk about 4 or 5 cans of Budweiser. Stupidly, I packed my bag after throwing up hard for 15 minutes and decided to hike back to the main road, watching light fading in the distance. I'm about a mile into the hike back. At this point, I've been sick twice and am completely sobered up by throwing up so much. I've got sports bottles full of water. I now stop to rinse my mouth out. At this point, it's near pitch black, so I got into my bag to get out my torch, small knife and my .22 air gun. As I start zipping my bag back up, I hear twig snap nearby and assume it's a rabbit or fox. I shine my torch, but there's nothing. This doesn't make sense because surely I'm at least going to see reflective eyes, but oh well. 5 minutes later, I hear what sounds like running, maybe 100 yards behind me, and lots of twigs snapping. I turn around and assume it's my friend, and I say, "Are you kidding me?" I said I knew someone's there, and I'm not joking. I see movement through the trees probably 80 feet away. Whatever this is big. I mean 6 or 7 feet tall and completely black. At this point, my sickness is gone, and my heart's beating through my chest. The hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and I get this feeling that I can only describe as feeling almost dizzy at the surreal position that I found myself in. I take off my rucksack and hang it up. I kill my torch. I still think it's my friends, but I have this horrible feeling. It was too big. I've got my knife though in my jacket pocket, and my pistol gripped harder than I can possibly ever do normally. I walk in the darkness for about 100 yards and stop dead behind a tree and wait. I'm trying my hardest to control my breathing, but is supremely difficult now. Sure enough, I hear movement again. Very difficult to pinpoint, but it's getting closer. Now I'm caught in two minds, to continue to hide or confront. I decide the latter, and now I burst out from the brush. I'm in two minds, but I have to run now. I point my torch in the general direction of the sound, and there's branches moving. I start moving away from the area like an SAS trooper. I hear distance movement again. Lots of twigs breaking now, from heavy footprints. I don't see anyone now, but I know I'll shoot them. Silence now. I wait a few minutes and head back for my backpack. It's not hanging over the branch anymore. It's on the ground. That's the scariest part for me. Whatever I've been chasing could have never beaten me back to my bag. So something or someone else moved it. The branch is intact, which doesn't make sense either. At this point, I tabble out onto the main road pretty sharp with no incident. I call my fiancée, who quickly picks me up, and I'm violently sick. I believe it's from fear. I tell her about what happened and she's freaking out. To this day, I still don't know exactly what happened. I do know I was terrified and I've never experienced anything like it before or since. I've had a truly weird encounter before. I lived in Southern California at the time, up in the San Gabriel Mountains, a couple of hours east of LA. I know when people think of Cali, they all seem to think of the beaches, but I assure you, the land here is very diverse. My hometown is super tiny and has a fairly popular ski resort on the western side of town. If you take the only highway out past the ski resort for several miles, there's literally nothing but forest. And a very old gold mine is actually still there, and it's kind of cool. After those things, there's nothing but national forest. And then, one insanely isolated very old restaurant that still functions, and then back to the forest for a long time. Anyway, just setting the scene. I was about 10 or 11 when this happened. It's almost Christmas. It snowed heavily, and the snow's still falling on the evening of this happening. My stepdad decided that we would cut down our own Christmas tree this year, so we get into my mum's big Dodge truck and headed off to the mine, which is a couple of miles past the ski resort. We got to the base of the road and were talking and laughing, etc. My stepdad was driving pretty slow since it was snowing decently. They had ploughed part of this road recently too, and there were big snow berms on either side of us, down near up to the top of the truck, probably 8 feet off the ground. So it's just barely getting dark now. Not quite dark, but twilight I guess. So not dark enough that we can't see anything, but dark enough that the headlights of the truck are on. Quite suddenly, from over on my side there comes a huge dark shape that arches over the top of the snow berm. It lands in the middle of the road fairly gracefully almost. My stepdad slams on the brakes. I am too stunned to speak or even scream, because there crouching in the middle of the road is some creature. It has a long muzzle and pointy ears, covered in fur. Now, I have really never seen anything like it. This all happens in seconds. The thing jumps down and crouches, glancing at us. My stepdad slams on the brakes, and then it just vaulted up and over the beam and disappeared. It must have been 6 or 7 feet tall. I've never seen anything quite like it. My stepdad refused to talk about it when I asked, terrified. If he had seen the same thing too, I knew he did because how quick he braked, and he was wide-eyed and white for the rest of the journey. I never did bring it up again because we hadn't had the best relationship since then, but sometimes I wish I could know what actually happened then. It still shakes me to my very core, even to this day. I live in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in northeast Georgia. It's a beautiful area with hundreds of miles of national forest, some great state parks, and tons of fantastic camping places. Unfortunately, my hometown is also relatively poor. While there are some out-of-town residents from Atlanta and other places, a lot of the people from where I am are really poor. I do freelance work as a technical writer, so I do a lot of work online. If I didn't have that going for me, I'd have to move somewhere else. It's just one of them small towns that will rob you of your ability to accomplish anything in life if you stay there for too long. No opportunities or chances for the people that fairly deserve it. And nothing for miles around, like honestly, you're trapped there. I hated it. To the east of my town, there's a massive national forest. It's loaded with great camping sites and lots of relatively unused hiking trails. I really enjoy hiking on them with my dog, but it can be a bit of an unnerving experience sometimes. It's about a 10-mile drive from town, and there's no cell phone service for miles or houses. In the past, there's been a lot of vehicle break-ins on the trailheads. I mean, literally, the gravel there is littered with bits of broken glass from what I can only assume is break-ins. Sometimes, there's really shifty people hanging around those trailheads or just driving around out on the forest roads. There are really rough roads, and you'll see these beat-up $500 cars barreling along them that are meant for a 4x4. Some of the people you see in the cars look like the guy that got crushed by an ATM in Breaking Bad. All that said, it's still a great place to camp. However, you have to be careful. A few years ago, two friends of mine and I decided to play paintball in the national forest. We decided to turn the paintball expedition into a camping trip, so we can play the next morning also. After a pretty uneventful day of shooting paintballs at each other, we drive a couple of miles to one of the most popular camping spots. Sadly, a church group or something had taken off all the spots. This really got us annoyed. This was really the only camping spot that we're familiar with, and it's getting late. We decide to keep on looking, so we drive for about an hour further into the woods. By now, it's getting dark, and we're getting worried about finding a spot. We all had GPS on our smartphones, but no service of course. We turn off onto an unfamiliar road that isn't in very good shape. In fact, it looks like the Forest Service rangers used a backhoe to block off the road with a mound of dirt. A broken metal barrier lay in the woods nearby. That being said, it looked like a 4x4 had been going over the mound, so it's worn now. Our F-150 had pretty high clearance, so we decided to go over it. Now, there was an old gravel road on the other side, and the road was pretty much clear of debris. We drove for a few miles down the road, coming across an opening next to a creek. There were some blue traps hanging over a plywood nailed to a tree. That's odd. That said, it was pretty much dark now, and we didn't want to keep driving around all night looking for a camping spot. We left the truck light running, and we set up in the tent. After we set up, I start noticing there's a lot of trash in the woods. I see a green bottle on the ground. I took a look at the label and see that it's a bottle of some home and garden insecticide. I was really tired now and thought someone was dumping some garbage here. None of us thought it was weird that someone would be dumping garbage here when we're more than an hour away from the nearest home. We set up camp, have some beers and made chili from scratch. By this time, it's probably 11 PM and we're eating. We noticed a faint glow from the other side of a nearby hill. At first, we thought it was moonlight filtering its way through the trees. However, the angles don't make sense. It seemed like it was far too bright and wasn't moving. It's a kind of glow you see over a big bright city, and we don't see the light source itself. Since there were no other access roads in the area, we decided to not campers. The hill was about a quarter of a mile from our campsite, and we investigate. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't have done it. However, we had a few rum and cokes in our stomachs, and two of us decide to look. My other friend decides to stay. He's gonna do some popcorn on the fire. So we start walking towards the light source, and the situation gets stranger. All the trees in the area have their bark knocked off in a circle around their trunks. It could have been beavers, but why would they go all the way around a tree in a perfect circle? We start talking about the ghost in pretty loud voices, probably due to our drunkenness. As we're almost to the top, my friend falls and yells out. A few seconds later, the light goes out. We look at each other and decide that maybe we don't need to see what it is after all. Walking back in silence and keep on looking back every few seconds, we decide to turn off our flashlights and return to the campsite with the moonlight guiding us. We get a couple of 100 feet from the campsite. I can see my other friend Isaac walking around. He's wearing a hooded coat that I've never seen him wear before. For some reason, he has a paintball gun. That seems odd. We look at each other. The fire's dying down. We don't see the campsite well. Now, we've been gone for an hour. From the distance, it appears as though my friend is looking for something. He kept walking around the site and peering in. When we're almost back to the campsite, we see our friend walk up the road we came from. We figure he's went to the bathroom and didn't want to wander through the woods like us. When we got back, we sat next to our fire waiting for him to return. All of a sudden, we see him lurch out of the tent and vomits. After we left, he had a few more drinks apparently. We ask him why he's wandering around with the paintball gun, and he gets a strange face and says, "They're locked in the cab of the truck." "Did you unlock it?" "No." We go to the truck and enter the door code and see our paintball equipment just as we left it before. The keys to the truck are hidden underneath a magnetic fob. I get a sinking feeling. What were you doing after we left? I watched a movie then fell asleep. But wait, you were walking around with a paintball gun, right? Did you just change jackets? He said he'd been in the tent the whole time, wearing the same unhooded fleece. Someone had been walking around our campsite, and it wasn't him. At this point, of course, we're all too drunk to drive, but we decide to go ahead and pack up and go back to my house for the night. We don't bother packing up the tent, we just fold it with the sleeping bags and think, heck, jumping in the F-150. When we get up to the dirt hump, we see something grey blocking our path. The metal barrier that's been laying in the woods is now erect. By this point, we've all sobered up. No one wants to get out of the car to try and move the barrier. I had a metal guard on the front of my truck, so I slowly tap it. It falls over, and we drive very slowly over it, terrified we're gonna pop one of the tires and be stranded. It didn't. As we drive down the road, we see a vehicle following us with its lights off. It's probably 1,000 feet behind us, but we keep catching glimpses of it on the moonlight. I now begin to drive as quick as I possibly can. The vehicle keeps pace. It doesn't get any closer though. It just stays 1 or 2 turns behind us, but always follows. After 45 minutes of speeding, we get back to the main paved road. I start to drive everyone back to my home and decide to go a different way. I've never experienced anything like it in my life. Rural camping can be very dangerous, and we've never went back there since. Red River Gorge is a beautiful and huge park full of wildlife, rock climbing, waterfalls and dense forests, gorges and beautiful views. The place feels truly isolated, disconnected from the rest of the world. One evening, my boyfriend D and I decided to go camping at the gorge. We went out and tried to find a campground that was as backwards as possible. Sites were spread far from each other. Our site, that was on the edge of a very steep drop-off. We arrived at sunset and quickly set up. By the time we're fully set up, the sun had set, and we began making a fire. About 20 minutes into relaxing, we began to hear howling that doesn't go away, and it doesn't sound like it's far from us. We're both freaked out by the realization that there were wolves nearby, but we tried to not overreact and continued to sit by our fire. 10 minutes later, I start hearing a faint yelling about 15 feet away past the cliff's edge. Now, I told Dee to be quiet and listen, and we're both frozen out of fear. A woman was now screaming. I couldn't make out any words at that point, but it was a deep, gurgling shriek, a noise that I've never heard a person make in my life before. Then I heard it. She was screaming, "Help, please someone help. Someone please help me," repeating this over and over again, howling at the top of her lungs. I'm terrified. She could have been turned around in the dark and fallen off the cliff. She could have been attacked by wolves or a bear or bitten by a snake. At this point we both sprinted into my car, frantically climbing inside, locking the doors. I tried calling the police but have no service. I threw the car in reverse and sped down the dirt road to find anyone that could help. The shrieks continued. I didn't make it far before I found 3 young men standing on the edge of the forest. I slowed down and cracked my window, still hearing that woman begging for help, and asking the men if they heard that. How could they have not heard it? I told them it was a young woman screaming in the forest. Then, 2 of them went sprinting into the darkness. Without questioning me or anything, the other one just stood by my car, assuring me he had no idea what was happening. While the 2 men were somewhere in the forest, I drove further down the dirt road until I found a spot to turn around at. When I came back, the screaming had stopped, and the men were back by the side of the road. I slowed down and asked them where the woman was, and one of the men that had run into the woods said, "Don't worry, it was actually just a kid messing around." I just said okay. I drove back as quickly as possible. We left the campsite and went straight home. Once out of the woods, we called the local police station multiple times to no answer. I know it wasn't a child. I've never heard such primal screams in my life. It made my skin crawl and my heart race just thinking about it. What did those men do that night? What was I a witness to? I live just where farmland meets the edge of the suburbia, on an island off the coast of BC. The climate here is sub-temperate rainforest, so the natural and untouched landscape is incredibly wild, dense and lush. I'm keen on endurance cycling, and I take full advantage of the trail network in the forest surrounding my area. I work long hours, so most of my winter rides are in complete darkness with my trusty trail light. One section of my home trail winds through a rainforest bog full of hundreds of trees. They're huge. It's absolutely beautiful in daytime. It feels like a magical place with shafts of sunlight piercing the fog, hundreds of different species of flora, and there's so many wild animals out there. It's really beautiful. Now at nights, my gut starts tightening as the thought of passing through this mile-long section of trail appears. One day about a year ago, I was lucky enough to get a chance to go for a ride through it, so I took it. It was cold and very rainy, with few other people out on the trail. I had packed thermos of hot coffee in my backpack, and I thought the rainforest-style bog was the best place to take a rest as any. Now, I chill out. I have an interest in botany, so I was looking closely at the lynches growing off of the huge Douglas fir. But suddenly, I felt distinctly not alone. No biggie. Lots of people use the trail, although not many are out there that day because the weather's so wet and cold. And that's when I heard it. A meow. That's odd because this isn't a good place for a cat to be alone. We have cougars and bears, but I hear a meow again. Except this time, it was canned and robotic sounding, like somebody playing a bad audio file with a cat. My gut starts to clench. It just sounded wrong somehow, and I can't figure out why. My hands were shaking when I unzipped my backpack to put my coffee thermo back in. I felt waves of nausea roll over me, and the air suddenly felt dense and thick. I was in a rainforest surrounded by trees and moss, but I felt like I can't get enough oxygen. I hadn't seen anyone for at least 10 miles, and I was distinctly aware of how far I was, and I couldn't really get any cell reception here either. Now, I hear the same meow again, but this time closer. I've never heard a cat like this before. It sounded like an imitation of a cat or a person saying meow. It was so tiny, cold and robotic. I now know that without hesitation, it's time for me to go immediately. I was panicked on the inside, but can't show fear, so I casually slung my leg over my bike and start riding. As soon as I got out of the bog, I ride the rest of the way home like a bat out of hell, glancing over my shoulder every few minutes. I can't see anything. I will never forget this experience for as long as I live. I've had some pretty disturbing things happen on my night rides, but nothing ever like this. I hate the fact that clearly something was imitating a cat, and I'm sure it was a recording. God knows who was out that deep into the forest too. I just hope I don't encounter this again. I used to love going for long hikes in the forest near where I live. I usually did it on summer's evenings. Yeah, I know this probably isn't the safest thing to do, but I always had my hunting rifle on me anyway. I mean, I'd be stupid not to. All it takes is one wild animal to go for you, and if you're unarmed, good luck to you. So anyway, I set out one summer's evening. I had my iPod playing some really chill songs and I felt really good about myself. I can't really get cell phone signal where I go because the trees cover it, but I like listening to my music. Now I was a good 40 minutes into my hike. There was enough moonlight for me to see where I was going. That's how I normally planned my hikes, when the moon was out of its brightest on the most clear days, so I can see everything. I'm really enjoying myself this night. I found true tranquility. I decided to stop for a minute, take off my headphones, and just pour out some of the hot chocolate I had in my flask. Now the second I do this, I have the feeling that I'm not alone, and I can't describe this feeling. It's almost like I'm comfortable in my own presence, but I don't want to be joined by anyone else, and this unsettles me. I just think I'm just being a little paranoid. I say to myself, thank God I've got my rifle, and I could have sworn I heard a laugh afterwards. No, it must have been just an animal, surely. So I go about drinking my hot chocolate. As I do so, and I'll never forget this, I hear someone whisper behind me, "Mind if I have some?" And a terrifying laugh follow. Now the next few seconds is a complete blur as I fumble, fall over getting up, grab my rifle, and scream myself, and sprint in the complete opposite direction to where I heard the voice and back onto the trail. I try and scream out that I have a gun, but I can't get the words out. What's worse is I hear rustling behind me. I continue sprinting up the trail, only to slip temporarily again, and now on my back. I lay there wondering whether it's better to pretend I'm still. I look behind me, and I can see what appears to be the butt of a cigarette lit in the distance. Well, looks like I'm going to keep moving then. I get up again, and scream I have a gun and I'm not afraid to use it. What's worse, I'm sure I hear laughter in the distance after saying this. I sprint all the way back to my car. I don't even bother going back for my flask or anything. I immediately get on my radio and call it into the park rangers in the area, who say they're going to check it out and they want me to show them exactly where it is. I say you've got no chance and speed out of there. And the whole drive home, I can't stop thinking, who in their right mind was out there? How long were they stalking me for, and what on earth did they want? They clearly weren't mentally sane, whoever or whatever this was. Now I don't believe in the paranormal, but this could have easily been something like that, because why would you be out there with no torch or anything? Maybe it is an insane person. All I know is that I never got to the bottom of it, and I never went out on my own in the woods at night again.